Hi there, and welcome to episode 66 of B2B SaaS Marketing Snacks. I'm Brian Graff, I'm the CEO of Kalungi, and I'm here again with Kalungi's co-founder Stein Hendricks, who's a serial SaaS marketing executive and ex-Microsoft product marketing leader. Today's episode is about growing your B2B SaaS company through acquisition, so using your capital to purchase businesses as a way to accelerate your go-to-market approach. This growth lever is used all the time by B2B SaaS companies, and it has some huge benefits, like allowing you to quickly enter a new market, fill a team or product gap, or just allowing you to buy your way into more of the market that you're currently servicing. It's also a very quick way to generate revenue and balance sheet growth and can be very attractive to investors. But it's not without its risks. Acquiring a company is a massive use of capital, and if it's done poorly or for the wrong reasons, it can lead to stagnating revenue with increased costs, fractured team cultures, or multiple competing go-to-market strategies that need to be serviced by a team that's stretched too far to support them all. So we wanted to give you the tools you need to go into these investments eyes wide open and ensure that you can make the most out of your acquisition and maximize the impact it has on your go-to-market strategy. Let's get into it. Okay, Stein, we are back. A few episodes ago, we discussed Ansoff's matrix and using that as a tool to identify and align behind growth levers that you can pull as a company. And I really wanted to take this episode and dive into one particular growth lever that I've seen used across quite a few different B2B SaaS companies, and that is growth through acquisition. It's a huge topic. I think books and books have been written and many more will be written on it. And it spans just about every single business discipline that you can think of, right? Finance, operations, strategy, etc., right? But there's also a ton of implications across the go-to-market field as well. And so since that is our specialty, right, I wanted to focus there. Why should you as a company grow through acquisition? What are the benefits and why would it be worth considering?
Yeah, when you have a very strong presence in a certain part of the market, let's call it product market fit, and there's a lot of other providers that are servicing the same group of customers, and you can have efficiencies because you have economies of scale on how do you service them or how do you do marketing, etc., then it can just be an extremely good win-win to acquire a company that may not have the same capabilities, in the infrastructure or the team, or they may do certain things much better than you. And because you're servicing the same part of the market, it will just allow you to bring down your cost, to increase the capabilities that you have, to make the quality of your product or your service better. So that's one reason. And then the other could be that you actually have a really strong position in a given market, but you want to expand into another part of the market where what you provide, your service and your product seem to be a really good fit as well, but you don't have access to that new market, right? You don't have relationships there, you don't have the partnerships, you don't have the reputation in that market. Then an acquisition could also be a really good way to speed up your achievement of product market fit in that new market. But both would sort of start with a strong position of product market fit in your existing market with a great service that you're already providing and a great product that has product market fit for that known audience.
Yeah, so it's almost like a speed hack if you have the capital, right? That's a big if, but to basically start building up on top of the success that your current product has or the success that your company has made, right? Using acquisition to fuel that growth, it just shortcuts, all of the time and effort that you would need to spend building it yourself.
Yeah. Most acquisitions are either a combination of these three or one of them. You buy customers, right? You say, hey, I have a value prop that's a great fit for these other customers, and now I don't have to go find them and do the marketing and the selling, etc. I have this other company that I can acquire, and that kind of cost of acquisition, acquiring those customers, is actually maybe cheaper than doing it yourself. That could be one reason. Or you could basically buy a piece of technology, a piece of software, products, services, etc., to complement your own service portfolio, right? That then allows you maybe to increase your ACV to existing clients. Or the third reason sometimes is to just buy talent and people, right? If you're in the healthcare business and you need more providers to provide a certain service, right? Sometimes the The trade-off is just, hey, it's easier to acquire a company than to recruit all these people, right? So, but it's usually a combination or one of those three that leads you to acquire a company, Brian.
Yep. One of the things that I've thought of or seen in the past has been, where you happen to have the larger market share, right? And probably the larger revenue, but, a new competitor has entered the game, right? And have a fresh new outlook, right? And are starting to eat your lunch in a few sales calls, right? It could be also a defensive maneuver as well. But, of course, you need to keep in mind antitrust regulations there as well. But I've seen that happen.
Yeah, and usually companies that we work with that are a little smaller, they don't have to worry too much about a very dominant market position, right? But yeah, it's a good point.
When do you think it would be just not advantageous for a company to pursue this strategy? Do you think one of the things that you said, right, is if they lack product market fit, maybe it's just too soon, but is there anything else that you think companies should consider when evaluating this option?
Well, it's a little bit like when you outsource something, you don't want to outsource things that you don't understand. And for an acquisition, it's a little bit similar. You really want to be in command. You want to master your current business, right? And understanding your current clients, understanding your value proposition, how to sort of run that in a healthy way, so that when you get a new team to join your team, a new group of customers that you need to service, a new type of product you need to sell, that you can do that by really complementing an already strong foundation. If you have some really weak parts of your business, then you have to just be very thoughtful. How do you integrate something that's maybe stronger from another company without it also leading to the things that are actually working being overshadowed, right? Or being disrupted or being just confused. So you got to just be careful. So if you're in a strong position, you understand your business really well, you're running it really well, it's of course much easier to integrate a new acquisition than if you have a ton of maybe mismanagement or you lack operational excellence. It's just a little harder to do it then.
And just similar to the ANSOS matrix, right? If you're almost going too far out on a limb and going into a pivot situation, right, with a new product and a new market, right, you may just be extending yourself too far, right, and it just becomes a riskier acquisition. So thinking through and maybe aligning acquisition to ANSOS matrix again, it's interesting because in my mind, going through an acquisition can actually fall into quite a few of the quadrants, right? All four actually. And you can use it to penetrate your existing market, right? By consuming, more market share, using it to access new customers, right? To make sure that you don't have to spend the time building your own audience in a new market, right? And even to plug gaps in product capability, right? Have you seen any bits of success in either of those quadrants or any factors that you've seen make those acquisitions more successful in a particular quadrant?
That's a great way to think about it, Brian. You can almost argue in the lower left quadrant that you're kind of either buying probably talent or capacity, or you're buying customers that are exactly like the customers you're already servicing. It's really more of a, how do you consolidate maybe with one of your competitors or potential competitors? In the upper left quadrant, you're kind of entering a market that you may not know that well, right? But you have a great product for it. And then buying a company that already services those type of clients is a great way to get the vertical and the industry expertise. So that's where you get a shortcut. And then the bottom right quadrant is a shortcut to not having to develop a service, right? Or having to really fine tune it. So I think you're right. It's really nice to kind of align it with those three, and that allows you then to define what does success look like for this acquisition to work, right? Were we able to turn, if you're thinking of the lower right quadrant, were we able to turn another product or capability into ACV growth, right? In the upper left quadrant, were we able to turn a company that is able to service another type of clients? Were we able to turn that into those clients also buying our products, right? And so you can kind of use that also to set the KPIs to give you a sense of what will success look like.
An acquisition is a massive use of capital, right? That has an enormous opportunity cost associated with it. Is there a scenario where you would recommend that a company, instead of acquiring another company, just invest those pieces inwards, right? And just focus on building out their marketing team, entering the market themselves, right? And trying to take out the competitor that they were going to buy. Is there Is there anything there that you would look for when making that decision?
Probably not very different from when a company starts to make a lot of profit and they're not sure how to use that capital internally, right, to drive growth at the level that shareholders expect, right? If at some point you think you can put that money to work better by acquiring a company or just use that to do it faster, I think that's kind of the trade-off you make. But there's always going to be a list of things that your team internally would love to do. But that's where it helps if you really understand your business, your unit economics, right? If we have a certain like ACV, but with a certain cost of acquisition of a customer, cost to service of a customer, then you can you have like a benchmark and say, hey, if we do an acquisition here, will the ACV over cost kind of equation be healthier, or at least as healthy as we do with our existing business? And if not, then should we just pour more in the existing way of going to market? But then, of course, there might be a limitation also in the ability for you to do that, given the size of the team, the capacity, those are good trade-offs to think about.
And this kind of brings us to semi-operational point, but especially once you've maybe decided that is the right decision from a go-to-market perspective, to invest in a company, to acquire a company, what, from your perspective, are some of the more operational factors that you would consider when acquiring a company, from a personnel standpoint, from even, a marketing strategy standpoint? How do those play into that decision for you?
I think it's really what's often undervalued is the ability to execute, right? If a company has an amazing machine of execution capability, that's very valuable to acquire. If you're, for example, on the verge of growing into a completely new stage of scale, right? If you're going from a $4 or $5 million business and you want to get to 10, 15, 20, a company that has a real culture of like being data driven, having an ability to onboard people very fast, having an ability to really do good like A/B testing of new ideas, that's a great thing to add, right? Versus a bunch of creativity in how to do those things that are more, I guess, typical for a smaller early stage company. Maybe that's not as good to add to your company because you don't really want more of that. You have plenty of that. You may have just outgrown that type of. So that would be an example, Brian.
How would you look at something, you've made the acquisition and you're merging the two teams together. There will be redundancies, right? Even just focusing on go-to-market. How would you take a look through that and making those tough decisions on who to keep and who to let go?
Yeah, go to one of my go-to tools. It never failed. Implementing OKRs has always been a great way of also establishing like what are the roles and responsibility of everybody on the team. Do people know why they're here and what success looks like, right? So if a company has those, then look at those. If they don't, see if you can implement them relatively fast. And people are able to really articulate why their role is important through a good, clear objective, and then are able to articulate what success looks like for that role in the kind of next 3-month period, which is the key result. I think that's a great way to get a very quick assessment of a team and the value and the dependency on specific roles.
And particularly taking a look at those OKRs, objectives and key results, and seeing how they layer up to the company's goal or your department or your company's goals as well, right? Some may be very well articulated and very well organized, but they just don't contribute to the overall company success, right? And that makes your decision a little easier as well. What would you say would be the most important things to consider from a marketing strategy, brand strategy perspective if you are acquiring a new product, right? If you're acquiring a new product and deciding how to go to market with basically two separate products, right? You could combine them. You could think about like, do you combine the brands? Do you leave them separate? What channels do you execute against? If you're executing both in the same channel, how do you handle that? What are the big picture strategy factors that you look at when combining two products in an acquisition that would be useful for our listeners to know?
Yeah, the last thing you want with an acquisition is to kind of confuse your audience more, right? I was at Microsoft for the first half of my career, and when we acquired a lot of companies, right? And we acquired a company that had a really strong brand and a strong kind of positioning, a lot of positioning equity. What comes to mind is Skype, right? Skype was a company from the Baltic republics that had a really strong, especially in Europe, strong brand recognition for instant communication, both voice and some text messaging as well. And what was really interesting is that Microsoft had multiple technologies that did similar things, but we quickly recognized Skype, of course, as a very important brand that we definitely wanted to incorporate. Where in other cases, when you buy a company, you really don't want that brand to dilute your existing, the Microsoft Office brand, right? Or we did a lot of acquisitions that, of course, were not going to be helpful if Microsoft would confuse that Microsoft Office was now suddenly Microsoft Office X or Office Y just because it had this new thing added to it. So that's, of course, for a small company, a little harder to determine, right? If you have a very strong position and you have great brand equity, etc., it still could mean that something you're acquiring is even better, right? And you don't necessarily know right out the gate. It's hard to judge that based on the existing businesses, both in isolation, because the sum of those parts could give you a completely new dynamic. But there's a couple of simple rules, right? Don't change things unless you know that you can make them significantly better, right? That's whether it's positioning, brand voice, brand visuals, etc., a logo, a name. And when you do so, make sure you're going to be able to do a good job, right? I think don't do things half. You may, right? The first startup I did after leaving Microsoft was a cloud ERP company called Acumatica. And I started there running basically the commercialization of the company, where we had a product and we had a name, but the name wasn't great. Acumatica has 5 syllables, right? Nobody would tell you that that's a good name. So when I arrived there and I was the chief revenue officer, I owned basically everything except the technology. Of course, a big question that the investors asked me, Stein, we should probably change the name, right? I said, makes sense. There's a lot of logic behind assuming that would be a good idea. And we looked at that. And of course, there are better names than a 5-syllable name, right? And especially at that point when Acumatica had literally no significant amount of customers. It was a really early stage, so it wouldn't have been that risky either to change the name. But I looked at the resources we had and the amount of time we had and the amount of people, and there were so many other things that for me had bigger impact and more potential that we ended up not changing the name. We did, of course, some brand work. We created the logo that Acumatica still has and simplified the branding a little bit from a visual and voice perspective. But we spent most of our calories on the real positioning from what does Acumatica do? What are the key promises we make to customers? We ended up deciding to go for a partner only, a channel only go-to-market. Those were much bigger decisions and they had far more impact than the name. And what happened, Acumatica's name today, I think is fine because people kind of get used to it, right? And there's many other brands that have long, complicated names that are not necessarily great in isolation, but when people start to know them very well and the brand equity kind of becomes the value that gets accrued over time, it's fine. And that happened to Acumatica. So I think, and that was a great example of where Acumatica also was, of course, part of multiple transactions, either partnering with other parties and at some point getting a large investment, where people could have decided to paint over the name, right? But they didn't. And I think it's a great example where I think you have to be very thoughtful of only changing things that you can make significantly better.
Yeah, I completely agree. On the flip side, right there, I have seen some companies who have acquired a company and have maybe glossed over some of the intricacies of merging the two teams, or had a little bit of hubris around the synergies that they could provide with the teams that they had in play, and actually ended up having to service 2 go-to-markets with the same team that was used to service 1, right? And kind of setting themselves up at a disadvantage there where their team really couldn't handle going to market effectively for both products, which ended up biting them later. So it is something that you really need to think through, and I couldn't agree more in terms of just don't do something half, right? It's much better to limit your scope and do it much better, much higher quality than spreading yourself too thin. Okay, last question for you on this. What would you, now that we've gotten kind of the theory behind it, and of course there's many scenarios that would change this, but what would be some of the general buckets that you would look at to establish kind of a 90-day plan after acquiring a company from a go-to-market perspective? I'm sure that there would be some sort of an audit period and you'd have to get some strategy in play, but what would you be looking at in those first 90 days?
Let me ask you to give your version first, Brian, and I'll come up with mine.
Of course, it always depends, right, on the scenario and why you acquire the company, what the teams are, etc. But I would be cautious about being too gung-ho in the first 90 days in terms of big changes, right? If I were, the go-to-market leader for a company that just acquired another company, I would probably, for the first, month or 3, depending on how complex it was, maintain my current go-to-market focuses, just because, again, I don't want to change something unless I know that I can make it better, and I don't want to have any hubris about my knowledge of the company, the new segment that we're entering, et cetera, right? So I would do a lot of learning and watching for the first few months. While I'm doing that, I would really want to audit the new company's product and marketing capability, right? How good is the actual product market fit in the market? Does the company have a good, solid marketing strategy? Are they solid executors, to your point, right? Do they have the right data in place? Do they have the right goal system in place? And then according to what I find there, I would start to rebuild, right? And fill gaps with, my team. We talked about the team redundancy thing there. I'd probably want to make those decisions within 90 days. And then I would start to work on how can we really integrate these two products, brands, do we leave them separate? Do we bring them in together? And I think from there, the go-to-market strategy kind of naturally comes into play, right? And it's much easier to make those decisions in an educated way that can have the most impact long-term. I'm sure the temptation would be to move really fast and make a bunch of changes right away, but I tend to like to gain a little bit more information, I guess, before making those decisions.
I think in the 90-day plan, the people assessment and the customer assessment would be my main priorities, right? Really, because the product, assuming this is a successful business, right, that have had financial stability and a good reason to make an acquisition from that perspective, you can trust more of that assessment before you meet the team. But the team itself, understanding what actually is going to impact them based on the acquisition having just happened, right? And making sure you retain the talent. Because the first people to leave might be the best people, right? If they don't like what happened, right? Or they don't feel appreciated, right? So spending a lot of time with that. And a lot of that can be combined with assessing, a lot of other information. Because people want to feel useful, right? And feel relevant. So that's a great way to both get a lot of work done and understand the business, but also make the most important, maybe, talent really feel appreciated. So would be one. And then the other, I would, that we at Kalungi as well, we love to talk with customers as early in an engagement as possible, right? To turn it into testimonials. I would do the same thing, right? Get a customer list and see how many you can find that are willing to talk, either because they have things that they like to change or they're really just happy and they'd love to voice that support. But those would be the two things I would add to what you just described.
Yeah, that's perfect. I do think that, combined, that gives you a really solid tactical plan that you can take into one of those acquisitions to really make the most of it. I also think that, from a personnel standpoint, to your earlier point, I think that you can use something like an acquisition as an opportunity to highlight people who are high performers, but maybe haven't gotten the recognition that they deserve, or especially high performers on the new team, right? This is a really nice opportunity to give them a really exciting direction in the company, right? And give them responsibility that they may not have been able to get, et cetera. And so it's a nice motivator. But to your point, right, you really need to keep the best talent happy, or else you're in a world of hurt. Okay. Well, let's wrap it up there.
Good stuff.
Thank you to Adriana Valerio for producing this episode and the Kalungi team for helping us make this whole thing work. And of course, you for choosing to spend your time with us. As a reminder, all the links we mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. And if you want to submit or vote on a question you'd like us to answer, you can do that at kalungi.com/podcast. Every time we record, we take one of the top 3 topics and jam on it. Thanks again.